Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, Governor, welcome to the Betsy and Wally Stern Conference Center here at Hudson Institute. I am John Walters, President and CEO of Hudson. Today is with great pleasure we welcome Governor Christie, the fifth candidate to join Hudson's presidential speech series. Governor Christie's career took him from a successful legal practice to the New Jersey State Assembly and later to the role of U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, famous for his prosecutions to this day. In 2009, he was elected New Jersey governor, becoming a national Republican leader in a traditionally Democratic state. Governor Christie chaired the Republican Governors Association in 2014, and he ran for the presidency in 2016. After leaving the office of governor, he founded a business and public policy consulting firm, opened a law firm, and worked as a senior legal and policy commentator for ABC News. If some of my colleagues would do a tenth of that, they would be very productive. He did all these things until he announced his candidacy for president in 2024. Hudson Institute has invited all major presidential candidates from both parties to present their views on national security at the Institute. So far, we have heard from Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Tim Scott, Governor Doug Burgum, and Vivek Ramaswamy. We are very pleased today to have Governor Christie join us to speak about his views on national security after just coming from his visit to the state of Israel, as I'm sure you all know. Please join me in welcoming Governor Christie.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming today. John, I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here, although when I heard the list of people who have been here already, I'm wondering if you guys are a jinx. Pence is out, Scott's out, Bergen was never really in, and Ramaswamy's crazy. So, I'm hoping to break your streak here, John. Thank you, in all seriousness, for all of you being here today. I can't start a discussion of national security in light of the events of the last month or of the events of my life for the last 5 days without starting in Israel. I was honored to be invited by the Israeli government to come, and I was overwhelmed to be there this weekend and to see firsthand and hear firsthand about the horrors of October 7th. Let there be no doubt that in Israel, October 7th will forever have the same importance as December 7th and September 11th have for the people of this country. More than 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered, women raped, babies burned to death, and bodies dismembered in kibbutzes all over southern Israel. And more than 200 people have been taken hostage, some of them also American citizens, and remain held in captivity today. We know that this kind of barbarism can't be justified, and it cannot be ignored either. And I just want to give you a couple of vignettes from what I saw. I was accompanied for most of the day by the Speaker of the Knesset, and he asked me where I wanted to go. And I told him that I wanted to go to Kfar, the kibbutz that is closest to the Gaza border. And I saw video of it, what it looked like before October 7th, and it was a beautiful, small community of Israelis farming and supporting each other, not only economically, but morally. The place I walked into was a disaster. Every home was now vacated. Many of them were completely charred and gutted from being set on fire. One home that I walked into, the home of a 24-year-old recently married couple, was, of course, now vacant because both of them had been murdered. The terrorists came in the front door of their home. The wife was on the couch reading a book. Her blood still stained the entire couch where she was murdered. Her husband was in their bedroom, and when he heard the intruders came out, and he was shot dead in the doorway of their bedroom, and his blood still stains the floor of their entire bedroom. I counted. There were 140 bullet holes in the walls of their small 3-room home. 140. I saw a video that many of you have probably read about. It's been put together by the Israeli government purely from raw footage. Raw footage from the body cams and dash cams of the terrorists themselves, captured after IDF killed them, and from the cell phones of victims, some who survived and some who didn't. I'll tell you 3 quick vignettes from that video, which is the single most disturbing bit of video I've ever seen in my life. The first is to listen to an intercepted cell phone call from a Hamas terrorist back to his family in Gaza. And this is what he said. He said, "Mom, your son has just killed 10 Jews with his bare hands. Your son is a hero. He's a hero." And his mother and father cheered him on the other end of the phone. Saw a video of a couple surrounding their 2 young children, 10 and 8 years old, in a hug when they heard the terrorists coming. They shot all 4 of them and murdered them, and then doused them with gasoline and burned them to the point where the bodies were melted together. And finally, I saw in the kibbutz that I visited, closed-circuit television cameras in both the backyard and inside the home of this family, and saw a father holding his 8-year-old son and his 6-year-old son in either arm, running out when he heard the shots. He and his 2 sons getting into their bomb shelter in the backyard and closing the door to lock it. 15 seconds later, the terrorists came into the backyard. They shot open the door of the bomb shelter and threw a grenade into the bomb shelter. The next thing you see is the father diving onto the grenade to save his children. He was murdered. And his children then came running out, both covered with blood, the 6-year-old blinded in his left eye from the shrapnel. They ran back into their home, sat at their kitchen table, sobbing and rocking back and forth, and the 8-year-old telling his younger brother, "You know, Daddy is dead. Daddy's dead." And the 6-year-old saying, "I can't see. I can't see." And the terrorists then coming into the home, seeing these 2 children injured and sobbing, and they went into their refrigerator and took out Cokes and sat down and drank them, as if they were invited guests for a fall picnic. It's not just the inhumanity that's obvious to everyone, but what I saw there was the joy that Hamas brought in visiting that inhumanity on every one of its victims. And believe me, I could spend the rest of the time here telling you stories just from that video. Now, there is no moral equivalence between Israel's response to that attack and that attack. I want you to remember that there was a ceasefire. For every person out there on every street and every college campus in this country calling for a ceasefire, there was a ceasefire on October 6th, and it was Hamas that broke that ceasefire. And secondly, that kibbutz 600 yards from the Gaza border, where I continued to kick spent shell casings still on the ground from all of the automatic weapon fire that they visited on these people, where the IDF would not let me get any closer to the border because they said there were snipers still there that had 500 yards of range to shoot. How do you expect the Israeli government to tell those families, the ones that are left, that they can go back to their homes as long as Hamas still has a military force in Gaza? It's impossible. And not only do we need to protect and stand for Israel's territorial integrity and the safety and security of its people, but we need to stand with them for them to eliminate the military capability of Hamas in Gaza. If we don't, the first two objectives cannot be met. Now, IDF is making significant progress in rooting this out, and they've now struck 15,000 targets, and they've seized over 6,000 war items, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they've killed thousands of Hamas terrorists, but there's thousands more to kill. We need to ensure that they have the time and the resources to do this before there's any discussion of a ceasefire of any kind. Now, look, we all understand that the loss of any innocent life, whether it be Israeli or Palestinian, is tragic. But I want you to remember, the Israelis care more about the innocent Palestinians than Hamas does. They are placing their people intentionally, forcing their people to be in harm's way. After hundreds of thousands of leaflets and messages have been sent to Palestinians in Gaza by the Israeli government, asking them to move away from the areas that are going to be attacked. And it is Hamas who is forcing those people to stay in place so they can win some type of propaganda war around the world against Israel. What Israel is facing today is not new. It's just the latest crisis in a world that is increasingly falling into chaos. And the reason it's falling into chaos is the lack of American leadership. Putin in Russia is engaged in a war of aggression, as we know, against our ally in Ukraine. Xi Jinping is moving ever closer to trying to attack Taiwan. And the Iranian regime is the banker for terrorism in the world, supporting its terrorist proxies who are now attacking American military sites in the region with regularity, with timid and weak response from the Biden administration. But let us not just limit it to the Biden administration. It's also the weak leadership that's been shown by Donald Trump during his presidency that's led to this aggression. Let us not forget that over his 4 years, he constantly threatened to walk away from our alliances and our commitments around the globe, undermining our closest friends around the world, while also sending an open invitation to our enemies to be aggressive, because they knew if they did, he wouldn't respond. Donald Trump's foreign policy is reminiscent of the 1930s. But Joe Biden's feels like it's out of the 1970s. His disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, his mixed signals prior to the invasion of Ukraine, including saying out loud, maybe a small invasion wouldn't be so bad, and his attempts to cozy up to Iran, first set out by his mentor, Barack Obama, and with the same staff that made those horrific errors, is now being exploited. In less than 3 years, any deterrence we had left in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East has been diminished by this weakness. So with that as a prelude, I think it's fair to say that these are extraordinarily serious times, and even more serious than they were 6 weeks ago. And they call for serious, experienced leaders. Too often we've heard from other candidates in the Republican primary, I heard them spout fundamentally unserious talking points. Fundamentally unserious. as a substitute for strong leadership. Now, most people at this point would give you some of those examples, but not use their names, because somehow that would be seen as discourteous. Well, I'm from New Jersey. So we're not worried about being discourteous. We're born that way. When Ron DeSantis thinks it sounds tough by saying he's going to slit the throats of bureaucrats or shoot immigrants stone cold dead at the border and use the United States Army to invade Mexico, this is fundamentally unserious. This is TV tough guy talk, which he learned from his mentor, Donald Trump. When Donald Trump compares his domestic political opponents to vermin, language that those of us who know history is equated with the worst of Nazi Germany, and suggests that they pose a greater threat to our nation than China or Russia or Iran or North Korea, and this is hardly making news today, he is fundamentally unserious. When Nikki Haley believes that just saying over and over again, finish them, in regard to Hamas, is a foreign policy, she can't be taken seriously. We need to know the next 4 sentences after that. And when Vivek says that our goal in Ukraine should be for Putin not to lose, it seems to me that's someone who's not fit for American business, let alone American leadership. So in this moment of global turmoil, we cannot afford to hand power to those people who think that wielding it is a game that they can be taught by political consultants who tell them how to come up with a line at a debate that might get applause for some stupid people in the audience. The fight for freedom in Ukraine and the fight for security and survival of Israel come as the world's most menacing authoritarian regimes are drawing closer together. We know that Iran is the global banker of terrorism and that their goal is nothing short of the eradication of the state of Israel and the extermination of the Jewish people, not just in the Middle East, but around the entire world. At the same time, we know that Iran is now supplying Russia with many of the weapons it's using to wage its war in Ukraine. And after Vladimir Putin's recent meeting with Kim Jong-un, we learned this month that North Korea is now believed to be sending short-range ballistic missiles, anti-tank missiles, and portable anti-air missiles to Russia to be used in Ukraine. And most troubling of all, Putin and Xi have repeatedly made clear that there are no limits to the cooperation between China and Russia. So today, as President Biden is meeting with President Xi in San Francisco, it's important that America put Communist China on notice. There was a time when we welcomed China's economic rise as the policy of reform and opening up held the potential to lift 1 billion people out of poverty. And we had hoped that this greater economic dynamism and connectivity with the free world would ultimately translate to political reform. Those policies were well-intentioned, but they were wrong. It isn't what it's led to. Xi has cracked down on dissent at home. He sought to promote Chinese-style authoritarianism abroad. It's become increasingly clear that China's rise represents the most serious threat to liberty, not only around the world, but here in America, since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. And like all dictators throughout history, Xi is not content to dominate just his own people. He increasingly is moving towards expanding his empire, readying his armed forces for a potential invasion of Taiwan. So that's why American resoluteness in all this is incredibly important when it involves Russian aggression against Ukraine. If Xi chooses the aggression in Taiwan Strait, he must know that it will come at a great cost and that the juice will not be worth the squeeze. Taiwan recognizes the necessity to support Ukraine because one of the most popular slogans today in Taiwan is Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. The Taiwanese feel the hot breath of the communist Chinese on the back of their neck. And Putin's invasion is now just a proxy for spreading authoritarian aggression all over the world. Now, let me just stop for a second here and tell you what I saw in Israel about this unification. I went to a military installation where there was a cache of seized weapons from the Hamas terrorists who had been killed. It'll be no surprise that there were dozens of Russian AK-47s. But also, there were anti-tank missiles with the markings of the government of Iran. And there were RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades with the markings of the government of North Korea. If you do not believe, after all of this, that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are not only working the Ukraine war, but the Hamas war against Israel, you're painfully and hopelessly naive. Until recently, our party has always been the party that's understood that maintaining peace requires strength. Strength from the American leadership. We understood that America was the indispensable country for peace, with alliances at the heart of that strength. But we have short-sighted isolationism running rampant in the House caucus because all of them are following the siren song of Donald Trump. They can't run fast enough to kiss his rear end. It's absolutely the truth. Ron DeSantis also wants to ignore Putin's aggression. And he says that what's going on in Ukraine is nothing more than a territorial dispute. And that the solution to it is for Europe to do more, even though, as a percentage of GDP, Europe is already supporting the Ukrainians at a much greater rate than the United States. But I guess that briefing didn't get as far south as Tallahassee. Vivek delivers these canned one-liners about the war in Ukraine and has laid out his plan for solving it. Give the Russians all the land they've already seized. Give them an assurance that Ukraine will never be in NATO. In return, Putin will no longer deal with President Xi. That certainly had to have come from his education at Harvard. Meanwhile, Donald Trump claims that he'll resolve the conflict in Ukraine in less than 24 hours. We know what that means. He will just turn Ukraine over lock, stock, and barrel to his brilliant, as he calls him, friend Vladimir Putin. It was great to hear President Zelensky say recently that he'd invite Donald Trump to Kyiv, where I've been, and Trump's too much of a coward to go, and explain to him in 24 minutes why that wouldn't be possible. Remember something about Donald Trump. Harm's way for him is having his second shot in the rough at a golf course. You'll never see him in Jerusalem. You'll never see him in Kyiv or any place else where he could even break his fingernail. Because he is fundamentally not just a policy coward. He is a personal coward who wouldn't ever take a risk with what he considers to be the single most precious life in America, his own. Putin's invasion threatens the peace and stability that generations of our fellow citizens have fought and died for. I hear often spewing out of Capitol Hill and Mar-a-Lago, America first. I suspect if I polled this room, no one else in this room is for America, let's say, third. Maybe Belgium first, Luxembourg second, and let's get in a nice bronze medal for the United States. We all believe in America first. But Donald Trump and the isolationists on Capitol Hill and our party believe in America alone. I know that America can never be first if America's alone. Our strategy in Ukraine is driven by a principled commitment to support Ukrainians fighting and dying for their country. And while I would have provided more weapons sooner than what President Biden has done, and certainly wouldn't have blackmailed them for those weapons, for dirt on Joe Biden, as Donald Trump did, I've been to Kyiv. I've met with President Zelensky, and he's told me to pass on to every group of Americans that I see these two messages. First, thank you. He said, without American help, Ukraine would now be occupied by Russia, and they will never forget the help we've already given. Secondly, that he will never permit one American soldier to enter Ukraine, that it is a point of national pride for them. He joked with me that we were occupied by Russia, it wasn't so great, and we don't want to be occupied by them again, but with all due respect, we don't want to be occupied by you either. Just give us the weapons we need, and the Ukrainians will win this war for our own freedom and independence. And we've done that, but with less than 4% of 1 year's military budget. And with that, the Ukrainian army has degraded 50% of the Russian military capability without one drop of American blood. Seems to me that's a pretty good return on investment for us, and one that we should double down on. You know, I went there and I saw the war crimes that have been committed by the Russian army, and I won't detail them now except to tell you this. I went to a place called the Ukrainian Center for the Civil Rights of Children. And you should know and remember that 20,000 Ukrainian children have been kidnapped by the Russian army and returned to Russia. Parents of those 20,000 children have not seen them for the better part of 12 to 18 months, don't know whether they're dead or alive, whether they're being cared for, or what has happened to them. This is not a territorial dispute. Territorial dispute, you know, is when the surveyor comes to your house and does the survey when you're getting ready to sell it, and they say, bad news, your fence is 8 inches on your neighbor's. That's a territorial dispute. The kidnapping of 20,000 children, ripping them from their parents' arms, is not a territorial dispute. And if America does not stand up against that type of authoritarian barbarism anywhere in the world, then we are not the country that we have been, and that, at least I hope, we continue to be. This is nothing more than head in the sand isolationism, everybody. And while it may make you feel good for a moment, it will make the world a fundamentally unsafe place. Many of our fellow party members in my party are failing to meet the moment with the moral clarity it requires. But for too many Democrats, blind ideology has obscured that clarity as well. We're told that there is somehow a moral equivalence between Hamas's grotesque inhumanity and regrettable civilian casualties caused by Israel's necessary and justified actions in its own self-defense. There is no moral equivalence, as I said before. And let's remember that Hamas are not freedom fighters for the Palestinian people. They are enslavers of the Palestinian people. And now they are their murderers. President Biden initially has stood very strong in support of Israel, and I compliment him for it. But the fact is, we cannot leave the defense of our allies in the hands of a party that has members that see Hamas terror and Israel defending itself as two sides of the same coin. And this is not just fringe leftist voices on college campuses. We've heard Democratic leaders in Congress call for a ceasefire that would do nothing but allow Hamas to continue their campaign of terror indefinitely. We've heard President Obama say there is fault on both sides. This is just as offensive as when Donald Trump said that there are good people on both sides of the Charlottesville incident. That is two sides of the same coin. And Barack Obama should be ashamed of himself. for saying that. These Democrats seem to believe that Israel should find an accommodation with Hamas. How do you find an accommodation with the terrorists who I just described to you earlier in this talk, who would call home to their parents to claim hero status for killing 10 Jews with their bare hands? Sadly, the unseriousness of both Republican and Democratic policies in certain corners of our country and the lack of resolve for the U.S. to be a global leader are not new. For more than a century, every generation of Americans have been called upon to confront tyranny and to defend the cause of freedom. And while we always ultimately carry this burden with resolve, it has not always been a straight line. When Hitler began his blitzkrieg through Europe, there were those in this country who said it was not our fight, that we were in no position to carry the burden, and that we should find some type of accommodation with Adolf Hitler. There are even those who tried to argue that somehow there was a moral equivalence because of the aftermath of World War I between Nazi Germany and the Western democracies. Not until the threat was at our doorstep, executed by the Japanese government, did we rise to the occasion. But we did. And in ridding the world of Nazism, we learned, at least I thought we learned, a costly lesson. That America could no longer count on oceans to protect us. That the only thing that truly protects us is our strength and the alliances that we form around the world to support that strength. We learned that every fight for liberty is our fight. Every fight for liberty is our fight. The threats to peace and democracy and global stability always threaten our vital national interests and our values. After World War II, and remember, that was the last time we turned our back on a shooting war in Europe, and it cost us 500,000 American lives. We then went about building alliances to collectively share the burden of defense while building our own military into the strongest force the world's ever known. When the Iron Curtain descended and the Soviet Union rose, American presidents like Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan helped to lead our country with moral clarity that evil must always be faced down by good, and that America and its allies represent the good. Yet, as often is the case, time and the comfort of living in the richest and freest country the world has ever known lead to these once dismissed isolationist theories to creep back into the mainstream of our politics. Navel gazing by people who think that they're protecting America by filling up the moat and pulling up the drawbridge. It never has worked and it never will. 3 decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, we've had 3 decades of relative peace. Now is the moment that we face a serious reckoning. And we do not need smallness from our leaders, continuing to divide us into smaller and smaller groups and pitting us against each other and somehow claiming small victories as somehow representing American leadership. But now that smallness, while at times in the recent decade has been bemusing and head-shaking, with politicians claiming victory laps for not closing the government, that smallness now is dangerous, very dangerous. The peace and stability that has been provided over these decades by America's strength has also been provided by America's moral clarity. We now have complacency about that. and that's threatening to undermine everything we've done before. So let me be clear. As president, I will lead with purpose and strength and continue to tell the truth. You see, if you lie about what's going on inside the country, you have no credibility when you try to communicate what's going on around the world and why that calls us to sacrifice. If you lie fundamentally about the menace that Donald Trump is, then you have no credibility in describing the menace that Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un or the mullahs in Iran are. If you are unwilling to stand up to someone in your own country, in your own party, if you're willing to call them the right president at the right time, if you're willing to say that I'd be inclined to pardon him, if you're willing to stand on a debate stage in front of millions of Americans and raise your hand and say, I'd support him even if he was a convicted felon, what credibility do you have to talk to the rest of the world about moral clarity? It's the fourth quarter of this game now, everybody. And that is the time for unserious people to get the hell off the stage. It is now the time for us to decide whether America is going to continue down an isolationist, self-absorbed, narcissistic, compromising path, or whether we're going to stand up and show the steadfast resolve that this country has always stood for. That's why I'm in this race. Believe me, it's not fun. But what it is brutally important. More important than I even knew when I got into the race on June 6th. And so it's time to stop now worrying about who the soup of the day is. It's time to stop worrying about having titans of Wall Street tell all of us that they've figured out who the next nominee or the next president's going to be. I would suggest to you, if you look at their track record, it stinks. They've never been able to predict it. I'm still waiting for President Fred Thompson. I'm still waiting for President Rick Perry. I'm still waiting for President Rudy Giuliani. I'm still waiting for President Jeb Bush. It's time for us to look at the seriousness of the problems we face around the world and decide that we want someone experienced and tough and serious enough to confront those problems in a way that history will judge led America to a next generation of greatness and security and stability, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the world. As we get ready to end this year and turn into the election year, those are the stakes. Time for fun and games, TV tough guys, and entertainers on the stage is over. And the time for the serious men and women of this country to stop worrying and whispering and start to stand up has come. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm running. And when I'm elected president, that's exactly what I'll do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Governor. The governor has agreed to have a brief conversation with Senior Fellow Mike Duran, who's also the head of our Middle East Center, and then take some questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, John. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, there's so much that I agree with you about. I thought maybe we'd start with uncomfortable disagreement.
Sure.
I wonder if I could get you to renounce a past position.
Probably.
Don't you? Oh, that's good. Don't you think it's time to distance yourself from Bruce Springsteen?
Dallas Cowboys.
Now it's time to leave now. No, I'm not. I won't distance myself from Bruce, a Jersey guy. I can't possibly do that.
He's not really a Jersey guy. He's a California guy.
No, he's not a California guy. You're wrong about that. I can't believe we're going to argue about Springsteen, but why not? No, a guy who's born in Freehold, New Jersey.
I'm trying to help you with the Trump base. That's what
You know what? I don't look. This is a fallacy of the campaign. I have people ask me all the time, how are you going to get votes from the Trump base? I'm not. I'm not trying to. His base is about 25% of our party. You want me to go fish in the 25% pond? I'd rather fish in the 75% pond. If Joe Biden right now were at 40% in any state in this country in the Democratic primary, the media in this country would be saying he's dead, it's over. Donald Trump is at 40% in Iowa, 40% in New Hampshire, 40% in South Carolina, and somehow he's a runaway victor. Give me a break. I'm not fishing in that pond because you know what? At the end of the day, this is about winning. And the way to win is to go right through him, not to go and sidle up next to him and promise him pardons, ask for people to give him a break after January 6th, and, raise your hand and say you'll support him even if he's a convicted felon. Seems to me that Washington and Jefferson and Franklin and Hamilton are rolling over in their graves. And Adams is up there telling them, I told you we should have put the thing in there about convicted criminals not being able to be president. You guys didn't listen to me. So, it is fundamentally, I'm not looking for help there. I'm looking to help them.
Okay, let's move on to the substance of your speech, and let's talk a little bit about Israel. Why do you think you were the first candidate to go over to Israel?
I can't really speak for anybody else, but I would just say that I think on this stage right now, there's a fundamental lack of intellectual curiosity. Not this stage. Not this stage. You know which stage I'm talking about. Yeah. On the stage of the Republican Party's presidential leaders, there's a fundamental lack of intellectual curiosity. Was it dangerous? Yes, to some extent, but we were well guarded, and we were kept in armored vehicles the entire time. And while my wife wasn't necessarily thrilled about the idea, I would say my youngest son came to me when I was packing to go on Friday, and he's the quietest of our four children and doesn't often express himself in very bold ways compared to his three siblings. But Patrick came to me and said, "Can I tell you something?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I don't think this is a very good idea." And I said, "So don't worry, I'll be back and I'll be fine." But I think at core, it's about intellectual curiosity. Like I had instincts about what I thought about this situation, but I don't think you could possibly really know until you see it. And the things I saw will affect me for the rest of my life. And when I'm president, it will inform the way I look at these problems. And so I don't know why the rest of them haven't gone. I'm sure they've been invited. I'm sure I wasn't the only one that was invited. I'm sure they've all been invited. But I went because I think it's an urgent problem. And I also think that if you want to be president of the United States, you have to show that moral clarity to the rest of the world. And I don't think there's anybody now who doubts whether I stand with Israel, and whether as president I would stand with Israel, because I already have. And now you don't have to prove it. You've done it.
Why do you mentioned in passing the problem in our university campuses. I don't remember a time when there was so much hostility to Israel. And it came immediately after the atrocities by Hamas. What do you think is going on? Tell us about the young people. What's in
Look, I think it's this is the area of disagreement for us. I think it's fundamentally incorrect to say that there hasn't been. I just think it's been on the down low. I think that we've had, and these boards of trustees and these presidents of especially our most elite universities have been hiring faculty members for decades that are anti-Semitic. And they've granted them tenure. And under the license of academic freedom, they permitted them to teach our children things that are fundamentally incorrect and morally infirmed. And it's not just now. Look, I read a story recently when I was doing research on this from, I think it was the Washington Post in 1940, reporting that the Georgetown University students voted Hitler one of the 5 great leaders of the world in 1940. It wasn't like he hadn't shown his cards already. I mean, we've had this problem on university campuses for a long time. And the fault for this is at the feet not only of the university presidents, but their trustees, who go there and think that somehow being a trustee is like a prize for the largest donation, which it typically is. But they have a greater responsibility. And they have the responsibility of hiring faculty, approving that faculty, and giving tenure to that faculty. And you see the things that are going on at college campuses in this country. And look, I had a son, our oldest son went to Princeton. And I was appalled at the time of some of the things that he was being taught.
I used to teach there. I was appalled too.
Right. I mean, it's really fundamentally a problem that needs to be dealt with. In my view, the president of Harvard should be fired today. The president of Penn should be fired today. Without hesitation. The president of Cornell should be fired today. That's it. I mean, this is not about freedom of speech. This is about rank and competence. When you have students, Jewish students at Cornell, who are afraid to go to the dining hall, and you somehow cloak that in free speech, it's outrageous. And so, I think that an American president has to speak out against that. Now, I have some of my opponents talking about how they want to pull funding from this and pull funding from that. Look, I'm fine to consider all that, but they're missing the point. We have not had a president in my lifetime who has spoken out against this.
Other than using the bully pulpit of the presidency, what practically could the president do to fight anti-Semitism and to reform our universities?
Well, look, like I said, I'd be willing to consider different funding stoppages, because quite frankly, the universities you just spoke about and others, whether you're talking about the Ivy League schools, Georgetown here in town, Stanford, they have more money than they know what to do with. These endowments are obscene. And yet they continue to feed like pigs at the federal trough for more and more money, put our students in greater and greater debt. I mean, our youngest daughter goes to the University of Notre Dame. This year, the cost for her to go to that place is $80,400. Now, in the abstract, you might say, all right, well, that's a lot of money, but our older daughter graduated from there not even 5 years ago. And her cost then was $62,000. It's gone from $62,000 to $80,000 in less than 5 years. So I think funding could be something you could deal with too, but I wouldn't minimize the bully pulpit. I think a president of the United States who comes out and calls these universities to task for what they're not doing will have an enormous impact on what happens. And I'm glad to see that some of the donors are now taking a stand and saying that unless you change your policies, we're not giving you any more money. But guess what? They've got tens of billions already. So that may be closing the barn door after all the horses have already gone out.
Okay, we got a hard stop at once, and just about 9 minutes left. I'll open it up to the audience here. Kennedy.
Thank you, Governor Christie, for joining us here at Hudson Institute today. So given the meeting that's taking place in San Francisco today, what would a President Christie say to Chairman Xi about TikTok?
See you later. I mean, I wouldn't even talk to him about it, quite frankly. I'd just ban it. That'd be it. And I've been saying this for years. It makes me incredibly unpopular with my younger children, who now probably wouldn't vote for me just on that basis. But if you look at what's happened in the aftermath of October 7th, TikTok has changed its algorithms to geometrically increase the number of pro-Hamas postings that are happening on the site, and leaves the misimpression to the people who participate in that site that the world overwhelmingly is pro-Hamas and anti-Israel. And this is just one small example, an acute one, but one small example of what they do every day. And if you want to know why it's such a bad idea to let TikTok in this country, look at them. Facebook's not there. Twitter's not there, or X. Instagram's not there. They don't let it in. Now, I'm not saying we should emulate their anti-information policy, but what we should do is not allow a Communist Party-sponsored website to come into our country and indoctrinate our citizens. I would ban it.
Sir. You got a microphone there?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Governor. As a fellow New Jerseyan, thank you for standing up for Bruce. Secondly, we were almost neighbors. I used to live in lovely Sussex County, New Jersey. Thirdly, having lived in Hudson County, New Jersey at one point, I thought you were the best thing since sliced bread when you
Did you
cleaned
pay
up
this guy?
that,
What is it?
that place.
Only $50. It's really good.
We got a short time. So
Sure, let me get to the point. So I have worked in the federal government for nearly 25 years. I worked for Homeland Security. I took a stand when President Trump was elected. I didn't like what was going on within that department. I did what I was asked to do as a federal employee, speak truth to power. Governor, I was fired for blowing the whistle on national security issues. I lost my family, okay? But I didn't lose my dignity. Sir, you were part of that administration. As much as I want to be there for you now, how can I be here? How can I cast a ballot for you when you were an enabler? I'm sorry, but that's,
Okay,
that's
I
the
think you
word.
got the
I
question
think
now?
I got the gist.
Yeah.
Look, elections are choices. And I made a choice in 2016 that I didn't want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States. And I tried to beat Donald Trump in the primary. I want you to remember, he was not my first choice to be president. I was my first choice. That didn't work out. But it was a mistake. I don't know. I don't know how old you are. You look about my age. I don't know if you've never made any mistakes in your life. I suspect you probably have. I think the difference is, do you admit your mistakes? And you know, anybody else who claims a purity test on any issue politically in our country, be happy to have the conversation with you and see if you pass it. But I think what matters more is once you realize you've made a mistake, what do you do about it? I'm not standing up there trying to cozy up to him. I'm not standing there trying to rationalize his conduct. I'm not standing there saying I'm going to pardon him or I'd support him if he were a convicted felon. So yeah, if it's a purity test, I think that the majority, the overwhelming majority of our party will fail it. But
No, you cannot. No, you cannot.
I can't get in a debate today, but if you qualify, get 80,000 donors, I'll get you on the stage and I'll debate you then.
This gentleman here.
Thank you, Governor Christie, for coming. I have cousins in Englewood, so I just want to put a Jersey
go.
spin.
We're everywhere, baby. We're everywhere.
Yep.
You know, people are fascinated with us. They make TV shows about us. They love us. So,
Yep.
they got it.
So the First Lady of New Jersey, Tammy Murphy, today announced her Senate run. Were you to not get the Republican presidential nod, would you run for the U.S. Senate? And you could miss out on the fourth debate. If so, will you drop out? Don't you want to avoid a repeat of 2016 when President Trump won with a plurality of the Republican primary vote?
First of all, I've already qualified for the fourth debate. So, yeah, I've qualified for the fourth debate. So I can dispel your worry there. Because I can tell you're very concerned. And I've answered this question in the United States Senate a number of times during my career. Going all the way back when I was U.S. Attorney, and people were urging me to leave the U.S. Attorney's position, run against then Senator Frank Lautenberg, the late Frank Lautenberg. And then when I was governor, had the opportunity to appoint myself, which is the easiest way to win, to the United States Senate when Senator Lautenberg passed away. And I kept getting asked the question, and there's a number of the folks on my staff of governor who are here today, and I kept answering the question no, and the press kept asking it 7 or 8 different ways. And then finally, I said, I would rather commit suicide than be in the United States Senate. That is still true today, maybe even truer today, given what's going on over there. But in the end, you have to know what you're good at. I would not be good as a United States Senator, and nor do I have any interest in being a United States Senator. I couldn't celebrate because my bill got marked up in the subcommittee. That's not the way I'm built. And so, for me, I just have no interest in it. And I'm not saying it's not an important and valid position. And there are lots of very good men and women who serve in those jobs today. And a lot of, I hope, good men and women who will serve it in the future. I'm just not one of them who'd be good at it. And so, do I see it as a political opportunity, potentially to run against Tammy Murphy in New Jersey? It'd be a very interesting race. But I would tell you that the worst day of that campaign would be the day after Election Day if I won, and I realized I had to actually go for 6 years to the U.S. Senate. I have no interest. I either want to be president of the United States or nothing.
What are your strong suits, or the things that drive you the most?
I like to make decisions. I like to get things done. I like to go to bed at night knowing that tomorrow I have something of enormous significance that I can accomplish if I'm good at it and I surround myself with good people. I like to make a difference in people's lives that I'll probably never meet and certainly will never know. I mean, those are the things that get me out of bed in the morning. It's constantly my poor wife, we've been married for 37 years. She's constantly tortured by the fact that I'm not motivated by money. Thank God she is. I've been able to live a pretty good life as a result. But the fact is that what motivates me is the decision-making process, being able to implement those decisions, and then watch the results of those decisions. And unfortunately, in the United States Senate, those are rare moments. They don't never happen, but they rarely happen. The action is in the executive for someone like me.
All right, I'm going to take the privilege of the last question, and just tell us what was the single biggest thing you took away from your trip to Israel?
I think it's what I said in the speech, that it's not
the second biggest thing, other than what you said in the speech.
Well, no, I think it's so clearly the most important thing, that it's the joy that Hamas takes in visiting inhumanity on others. People can rationalize certain acts of inhumanity at times because they feel justified. It's the joy that they took. I mean, I didn't talk about other parts of it. You're in trouble, by the way, for that. I know you. You got to turn that cell phone off. But
she said very nice things about you.
Well, I love her. She's great. But, I love Bobby Kilberg. But come on, silence the cell phone. So, and by the way, if she were up here and I were down there, she would say the same thing to me. You have. The fact is that the joy they show. I didn't talk about one part of the video where they actually were dancing around bodies that they just murdered. Dancing around them. I mean, that's why this idea that somehow
it's a death cult.
Yes, you can negotiate with people like that. You can't. Now, let's remember, this is not all the Palestinian people. This is Hamas. And I believe there are lots of peace-loving Palestinians who are revolted by this, but they are enslaved by Hamas. Hamas won one election more than a decade ago, and they have enslaved the Palestinians in Gaza since then, with no opportunity to choose other leadership. And so I'm not one of these folks who say that this is to be visited upon all Palestinians. It's not. But the moral equivalence being drawn on college campuses and on the Brooklyn Bridge and in Grand Central Terminal in New York is that somehow Hamas are moral equivalents to the Israeli government. And what you see when you're there is not only the breadth of the violence, but the impact of it. And the impact of it on everyday Israelis walking the street is palpable. And when they would see me as I was walking around and they saw this flag on my lapel, I had people who came up to me, whether it was in Ben Gurion Airport or whether it was in Tel Aviv when I was walking around to go to the hospital there, and would come up and hug me and say, please tell America thank you. I had the mother of that 23-year-old girl I referenced who said to me, I've never felt more alone in my life as a Jew. Now, like, you can't have that experience sitting here. You can't. You can't feel the emotion coming out of that mother who, since October 8th, when her daughter was brought to the hospital in the early morning hours of October 8th, has slept on a cot next to her daughter in that hospital room every night. And she looked at me and she said, you have 4 children. If this happened to one of your children, would you ever leave their side again until you knew they were safe? Those experiences are the experiences that teach you that your instinct about this is more than just an instinct. It's a principle that we need to stand for. And for people on the stage of this Republican primary to not go there, to me, shows their lack of intellectual curiosity. And that's dangerous in 2 ways, right? The first way is if you have a lack of intellectual curiosity, how the hell can you be president, and a good one to begin with? Because you have to learn something new every day to be able to be a good president. But secondly, that lack of intellectual curiosity shows an extraordinary arrogance about the surety of your own instincts. I've been around in this business long enough to know, as that gentleman pointed out, that I've been sure about some things sometimes, and then I've been wrong. And the only way to try to avoid, as best you can, being wrong again is to get smarter. And the only way to get smarter is to go places and ask questions and see things with your own eyes. And I think we should demand that of everybody. I complimented at the time. I think the fact that President Biden went over there was an enormous display of leadership by him. And the fact that, you know, I'm sure, and I heard from the president of Israel when I was with him, how important that was to the people of Israel. And if you have any doubt and you need to personalize it, what struck me when I saw President Biden there was, I think it was 8 days or 9 days after 9/11, when President Bush gave his speech to the joint session of Congress, seeing Tony Blair sit in the gallery in a black suit with a black tie, the leader of our greatest ally in the world, Great Britain, didn't just send a note, didn't give some video message of support. He got on an airplane and he came here and he sat in that gallery to listen to the President of the United States because he wanted the President and every other American to know Great Britain is not just figuratively with you. We are physically and literally with you here in this chamber, and I'm here to show that. That's what Blair's presence showed me and why I've always respected Prime Minister Blair, despite disagreements that we've had about policy after that, because at a moment of our greatest sense of vulnerability, that's when you need your friends more than anything else. So when I went over there, I'm certainly not an equivalent of Prime Minister Blair or President Biden, given the positions he held at that time and President Biden holds now. But I think if you aspire to be President of the United States, you need to show those people in Israel, every one of them, that if I am fortunate enough to be given this honor by the American people, that they'll have someone in the White House who not only knows what they went through on October 7th firsthand, but will carry it with me every day when I make policy decisions that'll affect their safety and security and the safety and security of our own country. And so that's why I think it's so important.
Okay. So please join me in thanking Governor Christie for coming. I really appreciate it.